There's no reason why that couldn't be your story.
You don't have an expiration date.
Ooh, I love that.
The actual pages. Like, that's all that matters at the end of the day.
This is the Authors and Agents podcast. Great, Jessie. I'm so excited to talk to you today. So, first of all, I would love to hear a little bit from you about your novel, Live Your Best Lie, that came out in January.
Yeah, so Live Your Best Lie is a young adult thriller, which is my favorite genre to read as well. But in Live Your Best Lie, Summer Cartwright is 16. She's an influencer. She has millions of followers. And so her Halloween party is the event of the year. But at her Halloween party, her bestie, her ex, her wannabe, and her frenemy all find her dead body. And from that point on, they become the main suspects.
Oh my gosh. It sounds just like, it's my favorite genre too. Like I love reading those books, and I have my copy on my way to me. I'm so excited to read it. But you also have your sophomore novel coming out, right? So that's coming out May of next year, and it's called Lie Until It's True. What's that one about?
Yes, so that one actually is a companion novel to Live Your Best Lie. So you don't have to read them in order, but you can. But in Lie Until It's True, a character named Amanda decides that she really needs redemption. So when an opportunity arises for her to go and stay with her aunt in Colorado for the summer, like she used to do when she was a kid, she takes full advantage of it. And she's a true crime TikToker. And so her former best friend, his mom was arrested for a crime that her bestie swears that she didn't commit. And so she decides to use her true crime TikTok to like bring a little bit of attention to it so that the police will actually take the time to check it out.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's so amazing. I'm excited for that one. So,
I am too.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, they both amazing. But tell me a little bit about your journey to being published this year, to having your debut novel come out. Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, it's been a really long haul for me, honestly. So I used to teach middle school. And when I was teaching, I was always running into the issue where I was constantly running out of books to give to my students because some of them were pretty voracious readers. And so there was this part of me that was like, maybe I should write a book. And I had never really thought about it. Like, I was not the kid who grew up wanting to be an author.
Okay.
And so in my 20s, I was like, well, I'll try and write a book. And my first one that I tried to write was a middle grade novel, but I had no idea what I was doing. So it was not very good. My middle schoolers were very sweet and encouraging, but also let me know, you do not know what you're doing. So at that point, I actually became a mom. I had my first daughter, and so it kind of got backburnered for me because I just didn't have time. And then a few years later, I was teaching high school. My daughter was a little older, and I had time, so I started writing again. My very first novel that I wrote was called Bitter Lemonade, and I still love it. At this point, it is unpublished. It probably will always be unpublished, and that's okay. But at that point, I decided, okay, well, maybe I'll see what happens with this one. Meanwhile, I was taking a few classes. I did the Stanford University online novel writing program, which actually was really great. It was a workshop program, and it was very flexible with my schedule. So I did that, and so I wrote that novel. I started querying agents, and I was like young and naive and hopeful, and I got rejected a lot.
Yeah.
And so at that point, and I think that, every author experiences those moments of rejection, maybe years of rejection, and that's okay. So yeah, that novel got rejected a bunch of times. I had some full requests from agents, and that was super exciting, and it kind of made me feel like, okay, like, maybe they're not saying yes, but I do have potential to do this. And so I ended up shelving that novel. I wrote my second one, which was called The Rest is Silence. That one is also unpublished. But that novel got me my agent. So that was exciting. So I signed with my agent on my second book. We went out to publishers with it, and it got rejected. So it got rejected 9 times, which didn't seem like a lot to me. But my agent sat me down, and he was like, hey, I really want to create a career for you and not just one book for you. So if these like bigger editors are turning down this book, maybe we shelve this one and do something else. And that was a really hard decision.
Yeah.
But I took his advice and did that. And actually a couple weeks later, one of the publishing companies, well, it was Disney, who had initially read that first book, they got back to him and they were like, hey, we like her writing. So if she wants to pitch us a different idea, that might be something we'd be interested in. So I actually sold Live Your Best Lie on proposal, which is pretty unusual.
That's very unusual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that was pretty crazy. So like I had 2 weeks to like come up with this proposal, to write the first couple of chapters, and I was absolutely scrambling. But yeah, it ended up working out. So.
I would definitely say it ended up working out for you.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. I mean, I love what you said about, you know, querying and being like kind of naive about it, because I think you almost have to be to even try this process, to go into querying, to go into writing a book and wanting it to be traditionally published. You need to be a little bit naive and like, oh, it's going to be so easy, even though we know it's not.
You're right. If I had known how hard it would be, maybe I wouldn't have been brave enough, you know? And I think because I had listened to tons of podcasts and interviews and like read all the things, but I think naively somewhere I was like, but I will be the exception.
Yes, right. Like, oh, it'll be fine. My book is so good. They'll want it and I'll get the first literary agent and it'll be fine.
Yeah. Yes. And obviously that didn't happen for me. I know people who that has happened to, so I call them unicorns because it's not often, but it does happen. But no, it was very normal for me. Like it took time and it took a lot of effort and a lot of rejection, but I don't regret it and I wouldn't change it.
Well, no, yeah. It made you the writer you are today. And probably that, like, I would imagine that pressure from Disney for the proposal, like, I always feel like I work better under pressure. So I would imagine that that's kind of what gave you a little bit more oomph to getting Live Your Best Lie created, I would assume.
Well, and there's something about not having time that forces you to not be a perfectionist. And I think that was actually really good for me. Like, just do it. Just get it out there. If you want this to happen, just get it done. And so I do think that was a good push.
Yeah. That's awesome. So tell me about how you approached querying. So, I mean, did you have like a method to your madness, or were you like super organized with like your Excel spreadsheet like some people are, or did you just kind of like wing it?
Well, at first, I think I was just winging it. Like, I would see agents like post things on Twitter, and I was like, that kind of sounds like my book slightly, a little bit, and so I would query them. And then once I probably sent out 10 like that, and then I realized, okay, calm down, take a breath, do your research. So I started using Query Tracker.
Oh yeah, I love Query Tracker.
Yeah, and that was super helpful for me just to keep track. And I mean, I might have gotten a little obsessive looking at like, okay, they've looked at the queries of everyone before me and everyone after me, but they haven't responded to me. So maybe that's a good thing. And, you know, massively reading into things that probably weren't helpful to me. But yeah, Query Tracker was good. And then I kind of made like an A list, a B list of agents. And with my first book, and this is something, if I were doing it again, I probably wouldn't do it quite like this, but I would query like one person from my A list, 2 people from my B list, and then just like 2 random agents.
Okay.
But then, you know, it hit me and my method for that, my reasoning was that I didn't want to burn my entire A list and then get really good feedback from an agent and be like, I could have just applied this and then it would have worked out.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, like, did I really want someone who wasn't on my A list to be my agent? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, there's something to be said about that, too, because, like, there's nothing wrong with up-and-coming agents. I think that is a really good opportunity to kind of, like, get in there if they're with a really well-respected agency. But I think for me, it hit me with my second book. I made my A list and I queried my A list, and that was it. And my reasoning for that was, like, these are the people I want to work with. These are the people who have shown sales records. They know what they're doing. They have experience. And I was like, you know, and then if I burn my whole A list, I'll move on to the B list and that's fine. Or maybe I'll move on to a third book. So I think by my second book, I was much more confident isn't even the right word. I was less confident, but I was more certain of what I wanted, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. And I think, too, once you've been through the querying process a little bit, you kind of start to realize, like, more about it. Just that it's, you know, it is the start of a business relationship, right? Yeah. And it's not just like, oh, please love my book and please love me. But, like, we need to work together well. And, yeah, like you said, the new up-and-coming agents can be a great opportunity. But if you're really looking for, you know, specific things in an agent, stick to those. I think that's great advice. Yeah, that's
And I think, too, another big thing for me was that I had other friends by then who were writers, and I had seen them sign with agents who maybe they were just so excited that an agent offered that they ended up regretting that relationship, having to part ways with their agent, and then starting over. Right. And I knew for me, I was like, I just don't want to do that. Now, I'm not saying that could never happen because the publishing industry is pretty fickle, but I wanted to take every step possible to make sure that that did not happen to me.
Yeah, I have seen that happen too, and it always breaks my heart a little bit to be like, oh no, you're back in the query trenches where nobody wants to be. Ugh.
Right. No one wants to be there.
No, nobody wants to be there. So for the people who are in the query trenches and not wanting to be there, besides what you've already shared with me, do you have any like top tips for people in their querying process?
Yeah. So one thing that I realized going in the second time around was that it was really, really helpful to get attention to have a really short, concise log line in my opening paragraph. Like, so, you know, I have my title, my word count, my comps, my genre, but then also just like a one-liner that could catch their attention. Someone told me somewhere, probably I went to like 1 million conferences and did 1 million of the online things. Yeah. And someone said, you know, you've got like 20 seconds to catch someone's attention. And so I started doing that log line, and I started getting much more consistent full requests after that. So that was helpful.
That's super helpful. And I think, you know, as someone, I will never say about myself that I love writing queries. I know some people will be like, oh yes, it's so fun and I feel so confident doing it. And I'm like, okay, but I hate it. And there's a few different things I've learned that have helped me, but you know, like it just takes a different mindset to boil your book down into this very, you know, catchy, salesy kind of writing. But I think that that is a really good tip and a really good thing to remember, especially like that you have such little time to catch someone's attention with it.
Yeah.
So my next question is a two-parter for you. So what is the hardest part of writing? And then what's the hardest part of being an author?
Okay. For me, the hardest part of writing is definitely the planning phase of writing. I would love to be a pantser. That is like my nature, but I'm not because I can't be. So for me, sitting down and forcing myself to write out that outline, and I do pretty extensive outlining, like my current outline for my third book that I'm working on, I'm like halfway done and it's like 12 pages already.
My goodness.
So I'm going to have probably, like my outlines are like 30 pages long.
Oh my goodness.
I never thought I would be that person, and here I am. And that is definitely, my outlines take me as much time as my first draft.
Wow.
So it just, to sit down and figure out the beats to my plot, it takes me a lot of time. And then the hardest part of being an author, I think for me, is probably the hardest part of being an aspiring author, and that is rejection. It just is part of the industry, unfortunately. I had an idea that I pitched that I like really wanted to make happen, and it was just a no-go, and that still happens even after you've sold the book. So I think that's always going to be the hardest part, because you get excited about an idea and you want it to happen, and then you have to kind of switch gears, and you have to hold on to your thoughts and ideas pretty loosely, in that maybe it's not the right time, and it's not that it will never be the right time, but sometimes you have to pivot, and that's okay.
And I think that as a writer, at least for me as a writer, like when I get an idea that I'm really excited about, it can be really hard to let it go. You're like, oh no, but it was so great, and I can see all of it panning out, and then you're like, okay, fine, I'll let it go. That can be really difficult.
That's my second book for me all the way. My second book, I still love my second book, but from those 9 editors who read it, the consistent feedback was it's not right for the market. Yeah. And so I don't think it's this book will never happen. I think probably at this point I would rewrite it because I've learned some things. But I think, I loved that idea, and I think it's a great idea, but it's not right for right now. And that's okay. Maybe it's going to be right for 2030, and down the road I'll get to publish it.
Definitely. I have a book like that too. I actually printed it myself right here and gave it to my husband for Christmas. But I started writing it years and years before kind of like A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and all those sort of books came out all around the same time. And then when I was querying it around that time, everyone was like, okay, we're so done like with this specific kind of thing that you're trying to do. And so that was hard, and it's like, but it's still so good. And I had many full requests and all that stuff. So that was like a heartbreaking thing. But, I've thought about and chatted with some of my close literary agent friends who were like, if you do this and this and this, it could still be a possibility, but it can be hard to let those things go and like move on to the next project for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's the only way to handle it is to throw yourself into the next project,
Yeah.
And help yourself to become as excited about the next thing. Because for me, if I don't jump into something else, then I kind of sit there and just hyperfixate on that book. Like my first book that I wrote, I was so heartbroken when it kept getting rejected because I was like, I think it's so good. And, there are still some things that I really love about it. Maybe. But years out, I see it now. I see.
But maybe you can incorporate those things into some of your later works, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, there is one particular element that I was really excited about from that book that I was able to use in Lie Until It's True. So I'm pretty excited about that, actually.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's flip this question. Instead of the hardest part, tell me the best parts of being a writer and being an author for you.
Okay. I think the best part of being a writer is that moment when all of a sudden it starts to flow. And I used to not believe that this was a thing. But it absolutely is that moment where you like hit your stride with a book and it's just like flowing out of you. Like it's not even coming from your own head. It's like coming through you or something. That is just the best feeling. And to like look back at a scene and be like, I imagined it. And this is exactly what I imagined. And there it is on the stage. That's so great. Probably the best part about being an author for me so far, and I mean, I only have a couple months of experience, but I think it's been meeting readers. It's been so fun having people like bring me their copy of Live Your Best Lie and it's annotated and they'll like flip to a certain line. It's so cool. And like, it feels kind of surreal for me because I've dreamed about this for a long time. And so to have it actually happen and to like get to go to these festivals and events and have people who have already read my book come up to me and like engage with me about it like my characters are real people. It's so cool.
I love it. That is like the dream, right? That's what we dream about. Just your book connecting with even just one person annotating it or loving a line or loving a character like you do, right? The best. Yeah.
I've had a couple people specifically reach out, like a couple teenagers who like really loved it and they're like, it's my favorite book, and that has been so cool. And then I have a character in my book who has spina bifida, and I had a mom reach out and say like, oh yeah, my son has that too, and like it was so special for him to see himself on the page. Like moments like that, it completely just blocks out all of the stuff that's hard and bad. Like for that moment, it's like, this is the best job in the whole world and I would never change it. It's so cool.
I love it. That is such a great part of it. I love it. Mm-hmm. So my next question you kind of already answered. So I want to go back to your like planning process because I am so not a planner. Although I feel like I've become more of a planner the more books I've written because I feel like you sort of have to. I used to, my first book, I like pantsed it the whole way and then I rewrote it, 20 times because I had no direction. So, you were saying how it takes you like as long for your outline as it does for your first draft. I would just say that your outline is your first draft, right? For you.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. It's just a very sparse first draft.
Yeah, like a zero draft kind of. It's true. Because I am figuring out all of those like major beats, and then I go in and I kind of fill it out and I divide it into chapters. And I like to write in multi-point of view. So for me too, like, it's the moment where I sit down and think, okay, like, I know that this needs to happen, but whose eyes should we be looking through as this happens?
Right.
What makes the most sense there? Like, who can it not be? Because it's like, you know, writing mysteries, it's like, well, we can't look at this scene from this person's point of view because that's just going to be a problem for me down the road. So things like that, I definitely do in the outline. So, but yeah, like, once you're writing on deadline, I genuinely think you have to be a plotter.
Oh, yeah.
In at least a little bit, because I was the same way with my first book. Like, total pantser, had no idea what I was doing. My first draft rambled all over the place, was probably twice as long as it needed to be. And so then, like, going back and, like, trying to figure that out was really challenging. So it took me, I'm going to say, like, 2.5 years to get a draft of that first book down.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, people ask me now, they're like, how do you write drafts so fast? And I'm like, I didn't used to. It is only practice, because when I first started, I was very, very slow. Yeah, much faster now.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I remember back to my pantser days, and I would say to people, like, oh, I just let my characters, like, tell me what they want me to do. And it's like, yes, but, like, I can also help them by thinking about it beforehand. Like, we can talk about it together beforehand before we spend hours and hours and hours writing stuff that's going to be cut anyway, right?
Right, exactly. And I know for me, at least, spending hours and hours and hours polishing stuff that I ended up cutting because I did not understand the revision process.
Right.
And so I would just sit there and, like, tweak one sentence for so long only to cut that entire chapter, and it didn't matter. So do a lot less of that now too.
Which is great. So on that note, tell me about your revision process. Obviously, you've got an agent, an editor who helps you, but what does it look like just for you before you send it off to your agent?
So I do my outline or zero draft, whatever, and then I'll do a complete first draft, which is, you know, book length. And then from there, I try and let it sit for a couple weeks away, like, out of my mind, try not to think about it too much, so I can go back and read it with slightly fresher eyes.
Right.
Yeah, and then from there, I like to make just, like, a list of major items that I know need to change. Like, this last one, I had one character who was so boring and pointless. I'm like, why are you here? You know? And so I ended up popping that whole character out, things like that. Or, you know, sometimes a great idea occurs to you halfway through a draft.
Right.
And you don't want to, like, go back and waste time weaving it back through. So sometimes at, like, the 50% mark, something random will just pop into my story that wasn't there before. And so then, you know, I'll make myself a note like, okay, obviously go back, add this into the first 50%, things like that. But that list is helpful for me. I like to have, like, I have a whiteboard in my office, and I jot them all down on the whiteboard, which is helpful. But yeah, and then from there, I get notes from my agent, my editor. And the thing that helped me most with that is I divide up the notes, because I didn't realize this. You don't have to take every note from your editor.
Right.
I honestly thought, like, well, if the editor says it, then you have to do it.
Yeah.
For the most part, I do take their notes because they're good notes. But every once in a while, there's been something where I'm like, I see where you're going. I don't think that's how it needs to be fixed. There is a problem here, and you were right about that. But I think I'm going to fix it this way. So, like, I'll make myself columns, and it'll be like, okay, definitely do this. This immediately rings true. Start here. And then I'll have a middle column that's like, think about this. And then I'll have a third column that is like, this does not ring true. Why not? And those are the things that I'll deal with last. And it's like, do I just need to ignore that? Or is that, and typically it does need to be fixed, but maybe in a different way.
Right. That's awesome. You know, I think revision is can be such a simple process, such a complex process. I mean, depending on how you think about it, right? But it is such an integral skill to have as a writer, because we need to revise. And I think that's just such a good reminder of, like, I love what you said, you don't have to take all the notes of your editor, but they are usually good notes, right? Because your editor usually knows what they're talking about. But you know, it's definitely good to be able to take notes and be able to pivot as you're going.
Yes. Yeah, I honestly think it's the most important thing as a writer, because there hits a point where it's like the book doesn't just belong to you.
Yep.
And that's hard at first to realize, like, okay, this book belongs to me and my team now. And then you hit a point where it's like this book belongs to my readers and it's not really mine anymore. And so that, like, letting go of the story and realizing that people are going to have different perspectives and opinions of it, and that's okay. It is challenging, but I think it's maybe the most important skill that you can have is just hearing the feedback and not letting it crush your soul. Because that is hard. You know, it's like this book is like a part of you. And so it feels personal when people don't immediately love every single bit of it. But eventually it starts to feel less personal. And then you realize, okay, like my editor is on my team. She wants this to be good just as much as I do. So she's saying this for a reason, and that's, you know, that's a good thing.
Yes, and I think it's just, like I said, I think it's just like a skill. Like, I think you have to have practice at it, practice at getting feedback, you know, and I think, too, the people who are on your team, your literary, your agent, your editor, hopefully know how to give feedback in a good way, because, you know, I think we've all experienced getting feedback in a not good way that maybe has hurt our heart a little bit, right? But then you still gotta, you know, find maybe some truth in it or look at it, but I mean, you know, it's just a process in and of itself, right?
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, I think one thing that I did wrong with my first book is that I gave it to so many beta readers that the feedback became very different and overwhelming. Yeah. And so I was talking to someone and they called my draft feedback soup because I was trying to incorporate like everything into it. So I started really only giving, I barely give my early drafts to anyone. I will let my husband look at it and my agent and my editor, and that is it. Yeah. And then once I have closer to, maybe not a final draft, but we're getting there, I'll give it to a few other people, and that is it. Because honestly, at some point, it is too many people with eyes on your draft. Too many cooks in the kitchen.
It is. And getting all of that feedback can be super confusing, especially when everyone's telling you a different thing, right? You're like, okay, so what's the right thing to do? And that can be overwhelming. I've been in that spot too, and now I'm at the point where I'm like you, where I have very specific few numbers of people where I'm like, okay, I know you're going to be honest and give me good feedback, and I'm not going to be confused by too many people.
Right, and I think that is important.
Definitely. So I've got just a few questions left for you. And they're more fun questions, but I'd love for you to share something with me that your readers wouldn't necessarily know about you.
Okay. This is something that I think people are always surprised by, because I think we have this idea of writers as these like introverted, like homebody type people, which is great, but I am not that person at all. I'm actually extremely extroverted. I'm extremely social. So my issue is literally sticking my butt in the chair so I can actually write my book, because I'm like a little butterfly. I'm like, ooh, plans. And so then I'm out the door and I'm like off doing things when I should be sitting in my chair writing my book. So for me, as an extrovert writer, it's actually so hard sometimes, because it is kind of a solitary craft. And so
it is, yeah.
Yeah. So I have to like really, really, really make myself sit down and be alone to write my books. And it's so challenging. But anyway, that is something that surprised people usually when they first meet me. They're like, wow, you love people. And I'm like, yes, so much. I need them more.
Oh my gosh, that makes me laugh so much. I like to say I'm like an extroverted introvert. And before I had kids, I remember just like sitting and I could write for hours, right? And I just feel like as a mom too, I just feel like you don't have that I don't know, that opportunity very often, right? So it is, I write on my phone, I write laying down on the floor playing with kids. I don't usually find myself sitting at my desk writing anymore, but yeah, I think as your life changes, you're just not able to devote that introverted writing time, right?
Right, definitely not. So I honestly am the type of person, like I'll have days where I get zero, like absolutely zero done. Like I'll even be trying and I get nothing done. And then some days I get like 80 hours of work done in 5 hours, and I don't know how it happens. It just does. So it's no minute like the last minute, right?
Exactly. That pressure. Sometimes we need the looming deadline to help us.
I do.
Yeah,
yes.
I do too. How many bookshelves do you have in your house?
6.
6. I love
Yes.
it. Are they full of books, or do you have like some decor in there?
They're pretty full of books. I will say I have a few in a row in my living room, and I did the rainbow shelf thing on those. So they're like packed with books in rainbow order, which drives my husband crazy because
how do you find anything?
Yeah, how do I find it? It's not like your series are all split up, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
My husband would go actually insane if I tried to do that. It wouldn't work.
It took mine a little while. He had to kind of like take some deep breaths through it. Now I don't know if he likes it, but he accepts it.
He accepts it. There you go. That's good. My last question can be a hard one. I'd love to know what your favorite book is right now. This is not favorite book of all time. This isn't favorite book ever. Just like something you read recently that you really loved.
Okay. Well, I read a ton of mysteries and thrillers. And I recently read the series, The Thursday Murder Club. Have you read those yet?
I haven't read
They're
that.
by Richard Osman. And they're murder mysteries, but they're very lighthearted. Like British comedy murder mysteries. They make me laugh out loud. They're so funny. And they're about this group of old people who live in a retirement community and they're just bored. And so on Thursday, there's supposed to be a different sort of club, but it gets canceled in like the rec room. So they start a murder club where one of them is a retired officer and they like start pulling out cold cases just for fun. And then someone gets murdered in their retirement community. And that's where book 1 starts. And they're just so funny and they're so fun. And I don't know what it is, but I love reading about old people having excellent adventures.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to add it to my list right now.
Yeah, you got to check it out.
Because there's that, I mean, the combination of like lighthearted murder kind of sounds nice.
It is. Honestly, it's so fun. And okay, this sounds so weird, but I'm kind of into that. The whole idea of like you can have a murder mystery.
Right.
And it's about the puzzle. And like it can still have tension and suspense, but it doesn't necessarily have to be super bloody and heavy.
Yes.
And there's a place for those books, but it doesn't have to be every murder mystery. And that's kind of what I like too, like a little bit of humor to it, a little bit of a focus on just the puzzle behind it and the people behind it, as opposed to like the gore.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm excited to read that one.
You should be. It's great.
Awesome. Well, Jessie, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It has been an honor to get to know you and to be able to share your books with the world. And I can't wait to have everybody, read Live Your Best Life, which is out now, so they can go buy it and get your book next year.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.